Story RH, the podcast that makes a long story short.
Welcome to all.
History is made of stories.
In this episode, we'll be talking about the true meaning of critical thinking.
For quite a few years now, soft skills has been a major watchword in HR. We seem to have rather suddenly rediscovered the forgotten virtues of basic social and interpersonal skills. And critical thinking is often first among them.
In some workplaces, I admit it seems like critical thinking is still seen as the mark of a dangerous revolutionary, when in fact it's quite simply the voice of reason.
And yet, it is a highly valued skill. In 2020, the World Economic Forum placed critical thinking and analysis in its list of the top 10 skills to develop for 2025.
The important thing is not to stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reason for existing, as Albert Einstein said. But for some, 5 years may not be long enough to cultivate critical thinking skills. What exactly is critical thinking? What's the story?
Let's start with the basics. It's not about being suspicious of other people's ideas or work. Critical thinking isn't about being critical of others.
Being critical of others means mocking them for more or less good reason, or attempting to triumph over a rival in a bout of verbal jousting, or constantly complaining and never being satisfied.
Yes, exactly. While the critical thinking we're talking about here refers to the ability to reason discerningly, to contemplate and question. When it comes down to it, critical thinking is a quest for the truth.
In other words, exercising critical thinking means not accepting information given us at face value, without considering its veracity, its source and credibility. It's about examining it in the real world, cross-referencing it with verified information, and questioning it using the tools of logic.
Yes, it's a test of logic, really. But while logic is necessary, it's not enough. In the original 1993 edition of Essentials of Human Communication, Joseph DeVito explains that the critical thinker possesses about 20 different logic-based skills, including the ability to grasp a problem, to organize his or her thoughts, and to draw conclusions. But first and foremost, the critical thinker must adopt the proper attitude.
You have to be able to think critically and be willing to do it. Critical thinking is really just continuous awareness that encourages us to use our ability to reason to find the truth.
However, if we think of it as a continuous test of logic, critical thinking does have its limits, namely, the incomplete nature of knowledge and the imperative to act.
Socrates said it very clearly. All that I know is that I know nothing.
Trying to establish ties between things and concepts, being on a perpetual quest for understanding, does not mean being in denial of the fact that it is impossible to know everything. It's more about the journey.
And the journey takes us to the second limit of critical thinking, the imperative to act. You could reflect on and question endlessly, but eventually it comes a time when you have to act, make a decision. So you have to know when to stop asking questions, without entirely giving up on your investigative approach.
Critical analysis must remain a driver that keeps us moving forward. We can never, ever, let it become a quagmire that swallows us up. Working, creating, building, and just living require us to make decisions, act, and do. So, critical thinking and taking action must not be adversaries.
So, while critical thinking is a continuous investigation, we must remain mindful of its limits to avoid getting trapped in a paralyzing quest for the Holy Grail. Critical thinking is different in this respect from the hypercritical method, which dogmatically rejects all affirmations.
It's really about assigning the proper degree of credibility to everything. Neither more, in which case it becomes belief, nor less, which becomes foolishness.
To recap, critical thinkers are able to use logic to separate truth from fiction and are also willing to do so continuously, all while remaining mindful of two limits: the impossibility of knowing everything and the imperative to decide and act at some point. Is that right?
Exactly right. Way to make a long story short.
Story RH, the podcast that makes a long story short.